Hello, I'm Heather Charles List, the City of Quincy's environmental scientist. I am here at the site of the Brook Restoration Project. I'm just upstream of Father McMahon Way, formerly known as Reardon Street. And this project is a large flood control and ecological restoration project that was initiated largely in response to significant flooding and storms in the past, notably in March of 2010. So the project is being managed by the Department of Natural Resources in conjunction with the Mayor Koch's office, other city departments, a number of state and federal agencies, and also private contractors and consultants. And the work is predominantly being funded by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So let's take a look at some of the work that we're doing. Beside me, you can see Furnace Brook. In this stretch, it's relatively straight, and the banks are vertical walls made of granite blocks. So this was put in place many years ago as a way to move the water as quickly as possible downstream in an effort to try to alleviate flooding, as well as to armor the banks for stability. But unfortunately, over time, this design is really not working quite as intended. And that is partly due to the fact that there's aging stormwater infrastructure that doesn't always have the capacity, combined with the brook, to deal with all of the floodwaters and rainwater that comes down. So if you look a little more closely, you'll notice that the stones are not necessarily mortared, and they shift a bit over time. So in the poorer sections, blocks have actually fallen into the brook. Sometimes tree roots are pushing them out, and so they're not stable, or they sink down into the soil below. And so that creates problems blocking the water, making it more difficult to maintain this area. So the scope of the work upstream of Father McMahon Way is to do several wall repairs. So by my feet here, you'll see the first of the wall repairs that was recently completed by the contractor. And a small amount of mortar was used to help hold things in place, and a little bit of stone. But largely this was straightening out these stones and blocks which were jagged and falling into the brook in this position. And that was done in several places along this stretch of the brook. Now let's take a look across the street at the downstream reach. So we're now standing just downstream of the Father McMahon crossing, and you can see that the vertical granite block walls continue in this area, and there's a culvert that also has seen better days, and so part of the project is going to be repairing that. And then as we look downstream, you'll see the transition from the older style to the newer reconstructed and reconfigured brook. And a portion of what you're seeing now is still under construction and will smoothly blend into the earlier section of the brook. This new design, in addition to eliminating the problems with the granite blocks, also provides significantly more capacity for floodwaters and stormwater to come through the system. And because we can't change necessarily all of the downstream infrastructure, so for example, the culverts and pipes that go underneath roadways are only a certain size, this allows more space for water in this area to collect. You can just see the first bend of the brook as it meanders, which allows more room, more volume for water, as well as a little space for the water to slow down. And we'll move and take a closer look so that you can see some of the other changes to the brook as we move downstream. We're now standing further downstream in Furnace Brook, and you can see a little bit more of the design with the meandering or sinuous curve. You'll notice some other changes to the channel. Now it's a lot wider. There's a much more gradual slope on the sides, which helps with reducing any erosion and storm damage. You'll also notice that there are river stones along the edge, and then we've got some other natural materials, natural products that help stabilize while the landscape is recovering and getting permanently stabilized. Eventually these stakes will be cut, but the rest of the material that you see here is all natural and will remain. As you move from the brook itself, the area closest, we put a natural netting to help stabilize things and seeded all of the area in here. And then in sensitive places, for example, on the corners, there are small plant plugs which establish a little more quickly and help keep everything stable and provide some wildlife value. Within the brook itself, you can't see all of this, but there are places where it's quite a bit deeper than the brook used to be. And certain areas we've intentionally made to pond a little bit so that there'll be some place for the water to be stored, because part of dealing with flooding is not just getting things downstream, which can just move the problem downstream, but it's also slowing things down and holding onto the water, much like a detention basin would do. In this case, part of the problem comes in to play when we have higher tides, because Furnace Brook outlets into Black's Creek, and the water can actually back up from the tides, and now you have additional water coming into Furnace Brook, and you also have less space for the floodwaters and stormwater to come downstream and exit out into the ocean. So all of this helps with that. And then as you look more upstream, you'll see that we have a lot of vegetation growing in here. In front of me and behind me, you're gonna see some woody plants, some shrubs, there's some trees here, and on the opposite side, we're planting over 50 woody plants, that would be trees and shrubs. In order to do this project, a lot of earthwork was involved, and so that was in part to make that additional capacity for floodwaters. Over 100,000 cubic feet of additional volume is now here. It was also to change this more gradual natural topography. And then in addition, it gave us an opportunity to do a restoration. It was necessary to take out the vegetation that was here, but much of that was invasive or in poor condition. A lot of Japanese knotweed, a lot of garlic mustard, both of which are non-native invasive plants. And what we put back is all native. They were chosen for their suitability for the site, their value for wildlife, and visual interest too. So for example, I'm looking at a beautiful tulip tree right now, and if you're interested in sort of the full list, we'll be happy to provide that. The other thing of note is that the value for wildlife within the brook is significantly improved. So this brook is home to American eel, as well as rainbow smelt, other fish, a wide variety of aquatic invertebrates and amphibians. And having a little more variability in the brook and a little more change over time in the substrate, the rocks versus the sand, and the way that the flows are, either quicker or slower, is really beneficial for those organisms. And that helps improve water quality, and that helps improve the general ecological health of the entire area. So I expect that this project will be wrapping up by the end of the summer. And I thank you very much for your interest in the Furnace Brook Restoration Project.